Alrighty, hello everybody. Welcome to the spell design stream and or video. My name is Cam or Hephaestus, and today I'm going to be going over how spells are designed in Wizard101. So this is my fourth year working at the company, and I do one of these streams every year. Where we kind of go really deep into something. There's a lot of math involved and spreadsheeting, so hopefully that's something you're interested in. Anyway, I should have turned off the I did turn off the clips, didn't I? Anyway, if you're watching on Twitch, I will be going through the presentation first and then taking questions second. So if you have a question or a comment, I will not be reading chat for the first part of the stream. And yeah, so let's get into it. So in this presentation, I'm going to go over a bit about myself personally, and like how I came to knowing about spells. Then we're going to go talk about spell effects, the creation rules, and then we have a spell library spreadsheet to show you how we decide what effects go on a spell. And then the values. So this is the more math-heavy part, where we're going to talk about how the numbers on the spell are decided and all that stuff, including another spreadsheet. So that is what we're going to get going on. One thing to keep in mind is for any rule discussed, they're more like guidelines than actual rules. And what I mean by that is that anything is open to change, and every rule has exceptions. Granted, there has to be a reason for that exception, but yes, so keep that in mind. All right, so personally, from 2008 to 2020, I was kind of an off and on player. As a kid, as a teenager, just kind of, and young adult, I played the game on and off. I was really into Decathlon and Beast Moon, and then in the later ends of that, I did the events. But before then, I just did little bits of questing on and off. And then I really got into the community and hardcore playing in 2020, 2021. I made some decathlon guides. I was a moderator for one of the largest wizard content creators at the time, Ferric, and then I started writing some articles for Final Bastion. So, and at the same time, I played a lot more. I have 7 maxes, but at this time I had like 4. I mean, I had 1 before this year probably. So anyway, I got played a lot then. Then the beginning of 2022 in February, I got hired, which is super cool. And so once I got hired, I'm just going to talk about what I did spells related. I kind of consulted when Arc 1 Spellement, so like the 1 to 6 pip spells were done at that time. I wasn't the primary designer on this, but I was around. And then same with when School Pips and Archmastery came out. I started getting a little bit more involved, but still not primary. And then the year after is when I started becoming more of the primary designer and owner, which kind of means that I kind of start spells off. I own the spreadsheet, which I'll show you later, and I get to do a lot of numbers and documentation and stuff like that. So there's various spell changes in that year, and the Wallaroo spells was probably the first set where I was doing that. And then since then, I've just been doing thousands, and that's not an exaggeration, thousands of new spells and spell changes, including tiers, of course. So yeah, Arc 2 Spellements and Selected Target happened at this time. Magic Weaving and Spell Fusion, that update had a lot. of spells and spell changes. And Arc 3 Spellements, of course. And then the most recent update with Darkmoor came shadow changes, and probably the largest spell audit we've done with just how many, the sheer number of changes. So now let's get into the creation rules. So from here on out, we're talking about when designing the spells, we're not talking about the numbers on them. We're just talking about, hey, what does the spell do at all? So, if a spell is a hit in blade or a hit in shield or some sort of conditional, this is the next few slides are about that. So, school ownership. This will kind of be no surprise to you guys, but fire owns damage over times. Ice owns helpful wards like shields, absorbs, and I guess stun blocks, but they don't really interact the same way. But anyway, Storm owns helpful charms like blades and spears, and they own helpful auras like Brace and Galvanic Field and those kinds of ones, and harmful auras like Attenuate and what else? The ones that are on your opponent. Myth owns harmful wards like traps and minions, which are coming out shortly. Life owns healing over times and burst healing. You can see most of these are hangings. This is the first effect. Death has harmful charms like weaknesses and infections. They also have the effect of draining or steal health. And then balance doesn't own any hanging effect, but they own a couple conditions like swap and echo. So with all of this ownership, hanging effects are shared between their neighbors, and we'll get a bit into what that means later. And then the effects and conditions are not shared, so that's why death is the only one with drains. And life is the only one with burst healing in advanced, at least. That is also an important point to point out at this point, is that all of these rules are for the advanced content. So if something doesn't follow any of these rules, that's usually why something gets banned. And that's what has that little symbol on it. So, last thing on this slide is some hanging effects are shared with only one neighbor. This only applies to Storm's auras right now, where helpful auras is shared with death, and helpful ones are shared with life, harmful ones with death. And some in the future might also have that kind of behavior. But right now, it's just those. Okay, so let's briefly talk about chromatic. So, for those of you who don't know what chromatic is, it is when an effect takes on the school of the caster or the target. So, for a chromatic blade, it gives you a blade that is your school. For a chromatic weakness, it puts on a weakness that is their school. So, if and only if an owning school is creating that hanging effect, may it be chromatic. And it may be chromatic, which means it doesn't have to be, which is why you could see in the most recent death spells, they've been getting some universal weaknesses in addition to their chromatic ones. And right now we have said that the chromatic functionality can be borrowed via school pips, which is why you see this example in Rainbow Serpent, why it has both chromatic death and storm effects. And then chromatic damage over times must be at least rank 4. Whenever you see rank, it just means the pip cost for conditionals, and must be at least rank 5 for base creation. The reason for this is that chromatic dots, say like if fire was chromatic, it would be too low pip and not enough investment on the non-fires to get the dot utility that is clearing a shield, more or less clearing a shield every turn. You'll see this moving forward, but dots are in an odd place because sometimes they're treated as shield counters, sometimes they're not. For now, we've mostly considered them to be shield counters just due to how they're used. And then lastly, chromatic accelerators like blades and traps that result from a countering conditional, like clear must be at least rank 8. This is a rule we added, I was going to say recently, but it might have been quite a bit ago, that changed the effects on spells like Minotaur and Stormzilla, where they were previously making chromatic, now they make school specific. And the reason for this change was that for the schools that were borrowing, because they were lower rank, they weren't investing into the damage stats as much for the counter. So that is where we're at with those. And just to mention again, all these rules are guidelines that get created as we go, and anything is up to discussion. So yeah, that is that. Now let's get into the magic wheel. So most of you might know how this works, but let me lay it out for you. So this is a janky version of the magic wheel that I made that kind of shows all the connections. Basically, each non-balanced school counters 2 other schools and synergizes with 2 other schools as well, relating to wheel proximity. So the yellow arrows show the counters, the green arrows show synergies. So storm counters fire and life and synergizes with life and death. And round the wheel it goes. Schools do not have a stronger counter or synergy with either neighbor. This is important to point out. At some point we considered, say for a damage over time counter, we had considered like, hey, maybe Storm does that better than Life, or maybe Life does that better than Storm. They both counter it, but we decided to make them equal, which means that if you're dual schooling, if you're not either of those schools, then you can pretty freely choose between Storm or Life for that counter. Whereas we felt like it would give fewer options if it was more limited. Same with synergizing. Your forward, you'll see the terminology come up later, but your forward synergy and your backward synergy on the wheel, they are equal, so you don't synergize with one better than another. Again, that's to make it more balanced and leave options open. So schools can create any hanging effect that they own, or any hanging effect that their synergy schools own. This was kind of stated before, but in the other way. So if you are death, you can make death things, so weaknesses, ice things, which are shields and such, and storm things, which are blades and auras and such. So that's how we decide what can be on a new lore spell, for example. That's a hidden utility. Then we have balance. Balance synergizes with every other school, and every school synergizes with balance. The way that it does it is a bit different. So balance synergizes with everybody because it creates all of the it's able to create all of the hanging effects. And then every school synergizes with balance because if you're trying to, say a myth is trying to do some sort of trap strategy, balance could work for that because they have some trap tools, because they have some of everything. So yes, I'm saying so a lot. I'm not the best public speaker. Anyway, okay. Balance soft counters every other school, and every school partially counters balance. So this is where balance is not able to hard counter, and what I mean by that is it cannot remove board state. So It's not going to clear a shield, but it might swap it around. It might echo it, which means duplicating it, essentially. But yeah, so that's a pretty hard rule for balance. If balance was able to hard counter everything, we kind of saw this before with the writing the scales and Eye of Vigilance, then it just kind of becomes the default option, and it's a bit, yeah. If it can counter everything, then it's too powerful. So that is why, and yes, to make it an option to go into the other schools. So to go into balance, you're kind of spreading yourself wide without, but you're countering everything, but not as great. And then every school partially counters balance because balance itself, its combos are with using multiple hanging effects, and you'll see that as we go on. But like balance tends to work with opposites of the wheel. So say, ice and life, they'll do like a shield and hot kind of combo, in which case every other school can partially counter it because they can counter those effects. So unless you are ice and life, you can counter at least one of those two things. So with that, balance kind of spreads it. It's able to combine those two things, which is for more powerful combos, but also leaves them more vulnerable because the chances are much higher that your opponent can counter one of the two things. Okay, and we're not done with Magic Wheel yet. So here we go. So this is a little snippet of a board that we use to kind of go over exactly what conversions can be done. As you can see there, Storm synergizes with Death and Life, it counters Life and Fire, and it shows you all the little conversions that can happen. And let me bring this back up for you. So for counters, you can clear, for the purposes of this, I'm saying A is the one that's within your elemental or spiritual school triad, and B is the one that's not. So in Storm's case, A would be fire, B would be life, but again, to equal effect, but had to differentiate them somehow. Anyway, so you can convert those into mine, being blades or auras. You can see, I guess Triton and Stormzilla would be examples for that for Storm. Clear A into backwards, and again, backwards, forwards synergies are how I'm differentiating the green arrows. So clearing A into backwards means clearing a dot into a weakness. So they have that with lightning bats like Leviathan. Clearing B into forwards, this is the same, or the Jinn conversion, which is the same effect. So clearing a hot into a hot, which is also where the pushes and steals come from. So that is the counters. Oh no, there's another last one with a kind of an asterisk, where you see a couple at rank 10 only have some clears into pips. We are unsure what our final rule will be for this, but we're a bit nervous on continuing to use pips because pips are not counterable. And yeah, so anyway, pivots. Pivots are what we call the gambits, where you turn one thing into another. So there's 3 ways you can gambit into your own. So for Storm again, gambit forwards into mine, so hots into blades, weaknesses into blades, or mine into mine, blades into stronger blades. So yeah, that is how you go into your own, and then you can convert your 2 synergies into each other. So forwards into backwards, backwards into forwards. Life into death, death into life. Because you are uniquely in between those 2 schools. And then lastly, you can do yours forwards or backwards into pips or damage. Again, with an asterisk, we're not sure we want to do pips anymore. But as you could see with the most recent Path Cs that we've been designing, we have been adding more of these that go into damage. And of course, the original Gambit spells were all 3 types into damage. Is there a last? Okay, there is a last one. Oh yeah, school pips can allow the use of other conversions if the condition and the result are allowed by the primary. That was a lot of words. We have this example of Glimpse. So, Glimpse of Infinity is a fire spell with a myth pip. So based on all of these rules here, fire would not be able to clear a shield into a trap because that would be clear B into backwards. Yes, so that's one that they don't have, but with a myth pip that was given. But clearing shields and creating traps are both things that fire can do, but it's just not usually one of their conversions. And that's kind of a good point to pull out. The reason that it's restricted like this is such that every conversion on the wheel is unique to a school. So, like this Glimpse of Infinity thing, fire and myth both can't do this, which gives you the people who are trying to decide a second school, it gives them more options, I suppose, rather than just always going to the same thing. And these strict rules you won't see as much in Beast Moon because the dual schooling element isn't really at play there. You can kind of convert anything into anything as long as you own it. But yeah, in the main game, this is how it works. And yeah, I think that's it for this slide. This was a lot. So again, if you have questions at the end, there will be time for that. Okay, so now let's go into Fusion. Let me take a drink of water for a second. Hope I'm not going too fast. All right, Fusion. I know this placement of the image is weird, but it'll make sense later. Okay, Fusion formulae spells must contain either the condition or the result from both Fusion components. So looking at this Minotaur spell that is in the rank 5 magic weaving, if you're myth going into storm, you can make this spell that clears a dot into a trap. The Minotaur spell creates a trap, and then the Stormzilla spell clears a dot. So that's how those combine into this. And now weaving fusions. Actually, before I go in there, if the components aren't necessarily both conditionals, like with the mono fusions we had in Selenopolis, then you pretty much just had a plain hit with a trap makes a hidden trap. That one's a bit more self-explanatory. But the point is that when you're fusing together, you take something from the one spell, take something from the other, and combine them into something that makes sense, so that you could conceptually intuit what a spell might combine into just by knowing what the components are. Like if you see the Minotaur and the Stormzilla in your hand and you're like, what does this make? You can kind of guess. All right, so weaving fusion specifically, each possible conversion is broken up such that each school has one possible school to weave into that effect. What I mean by that is specifically this like clear dot for trap. Myth would have to go into storm versus going into life, for example. This rule has been relaxed a bit and is now more of a guideline. That was the rule, but then we kind of, in some cases, we relaxed it a bit just to make sure the spell was as desirable as possible, because that's the most important. All right, so there are 3 main categories in order of priority when deciding a weaving fusion. So number 1 is a conversion that can only be done by this specific fusion. Again, Minotaur is the example for this one. Basically, converting dots into traps is something neither Myth nor Storm can do, nor anybody else can do without Weaving Fusion. Then we have a conversion that exists, but only on a school that is neither of the schools. So that's Natural Predator is one here. Gambit a hot into a dot. That is something that Fire can do on their own, but Storm and Life, neither of them can do it. So that's the second point. And then the last one is a conversion that does exist already, but add some sort of twist so it's not redundant. In this case, Gambit a hot for blades is something that Storm can already do, but it gives you life blades in this case, and it's lower pip. The ones that are really close on the wheel, like Life and Storm, are harder to make unique conversions for weaving, but yeah, that is where we're at. So again, these are in order of priority, so we prefer to do the conversions that are unique then the second, then the third, such that we're not designing ourselves into any corners. Even if spells don't exist yet, it's just important that when any future spells are made, we're not making sure that... where am I going with this? When future spells are made, we don't want it to outdate any of these weaving spells that we're making. So that is your fusion weaving, and I believe that's it for that slide. All right. You still with me? Here we go. Creation rules, Spellement paths. So when adding a conditional path to a spell that is a hidden utility, try to match the created utility. So as an example, Jupiter's Might was a hit and negative aura spell, and then the condition path is a hit and clear for that negative aura. So it tries to keep something the same from the cinematic. Granted, again, with the rules versus guidelines, I probably should have put a screenshot of this one, but Pluto's Peril, the death version of this spell, does not do this, and that is because Path A is something that the standard PvE folks liked, and Path B was something that the advanced, raiders and PvPers liked. So rather than morphing one of the two to fit the rule, we decided to let it stand. So that's why we break rules. But even then, there's some sort of similarity between the two. And then when you're adding a conditional path to a spell that already has a conditional path, match the condition exactly or by the owning school. I kind of wish I had an example of that, but what I mean by that is you can see these two conditional paths have the same Gambit shield, but if Ice owned another effect, like just say, for the sake of example, they had that Ice owned a taunt as an effect, then a fourth path of Dark Sprite could Gambit a taunt for something. So that is kind of how we're doing conditional paths, so that when you see a spell, you can kind of what it's gonna do to the board, more or less. We made this rule kind of looking at, I wouldn't say it's because of, but Monster Mash is an example of a spell that doesn't do this, where it has two conditional paths and they're completely separate. And if you keep going that way, where all the paths are completely separate spells, then when you see Monster Mash, it's a lot less meaningful. So that's why we're kind of trying to unite the conditions on these additional paths. All right, next. All right, Miscellaneous. This is kind of the last part of creation rules. So, spell should not counter two types of mitigation in the same spell. for the purposes of this rule, dots are considered a helpful ward counter or a shield counter. This was somebody once asked why Stone Colossus makes a bomb dot instead of a damage dot, and this is why, because then it would be a spell that clears weaknesses and shields. So this is one that doesn't come up often, but it's kind of penciled in there. All right. A spell should not create two different buffs that stack with each other within the same spell. So this is why we wouldn't have like a Storm Blade and a Chromatic Blade on the same spell, because the way that they stack is kind of fudges with the value a little bit, where to maintain the value of the spell, they don't do that. So that's why we don't have like even a damage aura and trap, like stuff like that. So next we have a spell cannot immediately use a buff created in the same spell. This does come up more often than you'd think. A spell that casts a trap can't use that trap. This is why Minotaur can't clear the shields first, because it can't clear shields, make the traps, and then hit. So that's why some things are in the orders that they are. And what else? This is also kind of why we don't do spells that create a dot and then immediately detonate it, because that's like the value of detonate assumes that you've spent an entire action to use that. So it's just kind of it's how it works. All right. Non-fusion weaving spells are designed such that the value is potentially wasted without using damaging spells of the weaving school. What this basically means is that for the non-fusion weaving spells, they're dots, traps, and blades, and auras right now. All of them are accelerating. The point of this is so that when you're going into that school, you're incentivized to, fully go into that school rather than just go for that spell. Like if I'm getting a ice and storm blade, then I would probably want to use storm and ice. Otherwise, I have better options if I was just trying to use one of them. And I guess that's not technically true for the 55 blades, but anyway, that is what the reasoning is for that. And then let's go to, this is just the last point on this. It's like some people asked, like, if we could just have shields when you weave into ice. This is why. Okay, 0-pip spells can't have conditions. You'll kind of see later how we come up with conditional value, but it has to do with the pip count. So there's a math thing to it, but also it's just 0-pip spells are kind of their own category of spell, where they're kind of wand hits are an exception, but they're supposed to just be straight utilities. 1-pip spells can't have counter conditions. We created this rule when we revisited rank 1s last time. I think we changed Bloodbat and Dark Sprite. They don't have enough value on them to counter anything, so that's more of a value thing, but it comes up, so there you go. Level restrictions. This one is new as of this current test realm that's running for spring 2026. Based on players' expected level when the spell was acquired. That's rule number 1. So if you get it at level 100, that's where the level restriction would be. We override that if the spell creates or interacts with an effect that only exists at a higher level, which is why you'll see Stormzilla and I think Triton both have level 60 level restrictions on their third paths. That's because auras are not at 50 or below. And then everything's going to be multiples of 10. This was only in this past one. That's because we don't have any content that would justify needing a level restriction other than 10. For those of you who don't know, level restrictions on cards are used in any sort of level scaling scenario, so challenge mode, raids, PvP, or museum farming, or certain team up things. I think maybe Fight Fest does it. I don't really know. Anyway, so that's how they get removed from your deck. So yeah, we don't have any versions that won't be a multiple of 10, level 20, 30. And then there's no level restriction on spells under level 20, because there's basically anything under level 20 is available in all content, even a level 10 scaled one. The only reason we would ever change this if we tried to make a level 5 scaled one or a level 1 scaled. I don't know if we would do that, but that's technically possible. Okay, I need a drink. A reminder to hold questions to the end, or if you're not going to be around, maybe I'll try to go back through. Okay. Actually, before I go on to the spreadsheet number 1, I will note that if your question is, why does this spell not follow this rule? Just to reiterate, there are the rules are more guidelines, and there are reasons that we make exceptions to everything, to the things that we do. Some of them don't have a reason, in which case it might be a mistake. But even fixing mistakes isn't free, because when a player has time and they expect a spell to do a certain thing, changing it has some implications. So yeah, so it applies to things like Anubis, I think. Anyway, okay. Nope, no, we're not ready to move on yet. Okay, let's pull up the library analysis. Let me make sure everything is ready to go. Yeah, all right. Let's go to spreadsheet number 1. Okay, hopefully everything is good. Oh, I guess I have my little thing here. Okay. Spreadsheet, yay! So this is what we use when we're coming up with concepts for spells. It shows you what conversions are allowed and how many exist. So let's go through Storm briefly, try to make this sense. So Clear Dot for Neg Charm, that is one conversion that Storm can do, and they have one spell that does that at rank 2, one spell that's Lightning Bats, one spell that does it at rank 5, which is gonna be probably one of the new shadow spells, because I can't think of it off the top of my head. And then Leviathan at 8. So if we were wanting to make a new rank 5 spell, we would, look around here like, what's around here? What's too close? Like, oh, it looks like maybe this one or this one. Glowbug, you got it. So yeah, this one is what I used mainly for when we were doing those new shadow ones. As you can see, so this first little section here is wheel 1 to wheel 1, which kind of means like things that only interact with the main 6 effects: dots, hots, charms, and wards. Excuse me. And these are basically the same conversions I had on that previous slide. So it tells you what they are: clear dot for pause charm, clear hot for pause charm, clear water, and then it just goes through and finds all of the ones, so we can see more visually where the holes are. And then this is where wheel 1 to wheel 2. So this is where you're making auras from those things. And Storm has a bunch of those as well. Then this is the wheel part. Then you can just look through this right hand section to look at just how things are broken up. So if you're like, hey, what are the ones that clear dots into mitigation? Like, hey, this spell right here, what is it doing exactly? So you can kind of see, oh, okay, you can kind of ignore this part. That's a summation. So it's more like, yeah, look here. So the ones that clear dots, okay, there's one that does it into a negative aura. That's a damage outgoing. That's probably at 2. That's probably the new shadow spell, I would imagine. No, it wouldn't be. It's something. Anyway, and oh wait, no, that's the new path of lightning bats, which is a good point to note that these treat paths as separate spells, not each individual tier, but yeah, paths. And then this is the old lightning bats. The rest are just kind of, I don't know if it's really worth me going much more into detail on this. We can come back to it later during the questions part if you need. But yeah, so this we try to use this balance. We need to fix balance because balance doesn't have a thing here, but they should. They would have a pretty much a completely unique set of columns because balance is balance. Balance is the special child. So then we have, yeah, I mean, every school has these. Obviously, not every school has has wheel 2 things, but and there's also, I guess I can bring up the synergy ones. These are where you have gambits and such into enders. Like enders is the damage one. So you know, as you can see, this is the new Kraken, and this is Tribunal Oni. Is it Tribunal? No, it's not. Turmoil. Anyway, and yeah. Anyway, so you can imagine how we would use this. We're trying to make things such that they are different enough from what exists, which is why there's no 2s typically. And you can kind of see where you're like, oh look, there's a big gap. You can more visually see where gaps exist. Okay, so I think that does it for this sheet. So let's go back to the presentation. Okay. That is that. So now let's go into numbers. Yay, numbers. All right. So now that we've decided what a spell will do, now we get into how do we get the numbers on the card. Here's a fun formula. Okay. The base value of a spell is the spell rank, again, the pip cost, +1. That +1 is probably important to point out at this time. +1 is what we give the value of an action. So you can imagine every spell you cast is at least worth 1 pip. So that's why 0 pip spells don't do nothing, they do something. If it wasn't +1, then like I said, a 0 pip spell wouldn't do anything. Which is why I guess a trap is a good example. So the traps at 0 give you one 40% trap. The traps at 1 give you 2 40% traps. So that's a good example of how that interaction works. Then you add the number of school pips. So for the purposes of this, I know on the card it says like 3 plus a fire pip, but in the spreadsheet we call it 5, and then we add we say that there's a school pip. So the 5 part would have been included in here. Then you add the school pips. So number of school pips gives you an extra 1. Then we add 1.5 times the shadow pips. Shadow pips are worth 3, so that might seem odd at first. But yes, that is because the other part of the value goes somewhere else, which we'll get to. And then you add fusion boost, which is flat now. So if the spell is fused, it gets a boost. I think it's about 1.3 or something like that. And yes, we can find for sure. And then all of that together, you multiply that times multi-target value. And a multi-target value is, you start with a 10% penalty, and then there's a 75% decrease per target. This was in the update notes from when this was revealed, I guess. When this was implemented a while ago. One target's 90%, and so forth down. All right. Then, now that you have your base value, this is all you need for spells that don't have a condition. Conditions are where it gets hot. Oh wait, never mind. There's one more. Tier value. So, if tier meaning Spellement tiers, spell writing tiers, it is going to be spell rank plus 3 times the shadow pips, which means you're getting extra value for shadow pips. And then you multiply times the tier number minus 1, which is why there's no bonus for tier 1. And then multiplied by 2.5. So basically all of this to say is tier 2 gives you 2.5% extra. Tier 3 gives you 5% extra. So all the way from tier 1 to tier 5 is a total of 10% value difference. Then comes the complicated part, which is conditional value. This we'll go more into in the spreadsheet, but very basically, you do your spell rank, which is why 0 pips don't get any, times the condition type value. And what it means by that is there's a different value based on the kind of effect and the type of condition. So if it's a clear versus a gambit, those have different values. And if it's, we have the option, I don't think we really use it, but we have the option to say like, hey, clearing a shield is less value than clearing it should give you less value overall than clearing a aura or something. Whatever we would want to do, that's where that happens. And then once you have that, then you add the number of instances times the instance value. And we'll go over what the instance values are, but basically what it means is if you're clearing 8 shields versus clearing 1 shield, that should be a different value, right? So you get those extras. And then this is where the remaining 1.5 times shadow pips comes. So when we redid shadow pips, we decided to put half of the value into the conditional part. What that basically means is in the non-hit part of the spell, and half of it in the hit part. So that is where we landed on that. And then, of course, the total value of a spell is the base plus the tier plus the conditional value. And that is that. So that is exciting. And, of course, in the spreadsheet, we'll go into how this looks. So, value rules. This one is about what percent of the spell's value, of this spell value, can go into the hit versus the utility. And when we say utility, it means any sort of hanging effect that you're making. Dots are kind of a gray area, but we'll get into that. So any hit being maximum being 100%, you'd think that's like, duh, 100% can't be over 100%. There are some spells that are banned for being over 100%. You mostly see this with lore spells. The top paths have more than 100% into the hit. And then the minimum being 10%. What this is used for is like double hits, Thoth, Minotaur. or hit in dots, which again, kind of a gray area. The hit has to be at least 10%. That one has less. Yeah, anyway, that's what that means. And then we have, well, actually one before I move on. The reason it's 10% and not like 1% is because at some point doing 1 point of damage is a bit gimmicky. So it's not like you're not doing it for the damage. You're not really doing 10% for the damage either, but there has to be some sort of threshold between 1 and 50%. 50% would be too high. So there has to be somewhere in there where there's a tolerance for like, hey, this is more of a utility hit, but we're not kind of goofing the numbers by making it a 1 damage hit, So 10% seems to be our where we're at with that. Now, hit and utility borrowed. So this is where you are a hit and utility, and the effect that you're creating is one that you've borrowed. So this is like a hit and blade on a non-storm, for example. The minimum that can go into the hit is 65%, the maximum 85%. So this, and then pair with that, the owned ones go from 55 to 75. And what this means is the spells of your own school will create the best hanging effect of owned. So basically, if you're doing a hit and blade at rank 4, the storm spells will make the highest potency blades. We could have gone the other way with this, but we decided that it wouldn't make sense the other way around. Like if it was, hey, you go into life to get the best blade, even if the damage is lower. Yeah, that's why it's like that. And then hit and conditionals is basically, it kind of encapsulates both of the previous two, 55 to 85. And then globals, basically, this shouldn't necessarily really be a whole separate column, but basically globals are 50%. And that's why they were kind of an exception to the 55% rule. We just kind of said that was okay for those spells specifically. Recently, we changed them so that they're 5 pips. And globals are bubbles. That bubbles are worth 3. So a 5 pip spell is worth 6 base, and so 50% being the global is that. So we thought that was okay. I want to go a little bit into why. Actually, first I have an example here. Top path is banned because the amount into the hit is too high, so that's why that one's banned. Then the middle path is more of the 85% into damage, and then the rest into the trap. And then the bottom path is closer to 65% because trap is a borrowed effect for fire, into more traps. So that 20% swing we thought was enough of a choice so that to make an interesting choice in this kind of path structure. So that's why that was chosen. And we did a bunch of different versions of this to come up with something that felt right. So this is where we're at with those. So the reason why the maximum is 85 for any spell that has a utility or a condition is to make it such that a damage-only spell still has a place in the game. Right now, well, before this, it was basically like, hey, do I want to do, like, look at the Brimstone, for example. Do I want a fire spell that's 4 pips and it does 470 damage? Or do I want one that does 470 damage and a trap? There's no choice there. So with this, it makes it so that those damage-only spells have some place. So if a spell is damage only, I guess a condition for damage would be more, but damage-only spells are the ones that do the most damage. Makes sense. 85 might be too high. I don't know. But 15% seemed to be a big enough of a difference to make that choice. Okay. Value ranges. So this is the value of a specific effect. And let me just show you the examples. So a helpful ward, shield. The base is 0.33. The reason for that is because there's an elemental shield that creates 3 at 0 pips. A 0 pip spell is worth 1, divided by 3 is 0.33. So that's why that's the base there. So basically a shield's value can go from 0.33 to 2.33. As you can see, the maxes we've added 2, and that's the range. The reason that we don't want it to be too high, and that kind of goes into the reason why we split up hots and dots, is because the counterplay becomes a bit too much, too swingy, I guess. So like if you could make a single shield that was worth 10 points of value, then that can be cleared with a pierce. Then you would never cast that 10-point spell, right? So that's why there's a range for all of these things. All right, harmful ward, all the way harmful ward through harmful charm are all 1 pip for 3s, so that's 66, 0.66. That's where you get these. Hots and dots are 2 to 4. I put an asterisk by there because it's not really 2. It's more like 1.8 and some change. As you can see, Sprite, for example, it does a little bit of a burst heal before the whole hot, so it's technically not exactly 2 because the entire spell is worth 2, but it's close enough to that's where we have it set to. And then auras are 1 to 3, which would mean you wouldn't have an aura more than 2 pips. Main reason being, yeah, like I said, because then, and people have already shown this with auras that are 1 pip, is that they can be replaced by a 0 pip one, which kind of makes you less likely to use them. So I did want to mention here, this whole chart, this slide, is why it's a bit complicated to move these values. Let me explain a bit. So if we say, for example, we created a 0 pip weakness that creates 3. Now you've essentially moved the value overall of a harmful charm from 0.66 to 0.33. And this top value, this base value, that's how much value you're given when you gambit it. So if I gambit a shield for damage versus gambit a weakness for damage, I'm going to get more damage out of that weakness because those weaknesses are worth more. So that's why it's a bit complicated to move these around, and why making the 0 pip double blade might have been a mistake, because then that becomes 0.5 is the value of a blade. So this is something we're still discussing. We're discussing, like, can we make cheaper blades without having to change these values? Do we need to change shields so that they match the other 3? Do we need to, etc., etc.? So this is something we still go through. And yeah, so if you change any of these base numbers, that's what changes every spell in the game that interacts with them. So that's where we're at. That base value is also the value for removal. So that, triage is a 1 pip spell, aka value 2. That's how much it takes to remove a dot, sorry. And likewise, yeah, there are some simple removal spells like Purge and whatnot that are a bit more expensive, but didn't really work out perfectly because of all these 0.66 and 0.33s. But anyway, so this is an important slide, so don't forget that. All right. Now, conditional counts. So this is for gambiting. When if it is a conditional that gambits something, you go down this chart, rank, and you find the effect, and that's how many it can do. So you're like, all right, I'm gonna make a 7-pip spell that gambits the blade, and then you kind of go down here and like, okay, that's 4. It doesn't seem very even, especially when you go past 8. We decided 4 was going to be the maximum for these main 6 effects that you could gambit. As obviously it's not linear, so it's something that we could, it's open to discussing. But this is kind of how it goes. Auras can obviously only ever be 1 because you can only ever have 1. And then dots and hots kind of go up by 2s. And you can't do it at 1 or 2 for dots and hots. Okay. Then we have clears, same kind of thing. This is for the main 4 effects. It is rank -1 is how many you can get rid of. So that's how it goes, and we've applied this consistently since the Darkmoor update. We haven't gone above 8. You could make an argument that, hey, a rank 10 spell should do 9, and a rank 11 spell should do 10. Math-wise, that makes sense. We decided to cap it somewhere just because it's at some point it's like if you're clearing 8 of something, chances are there's not going to be a 9th around, but it could happen. So, just to mention again, anything that you see here today is open to discussion, but this is where we're at right now. Okay. And now we're into the miscellaneous section of value rules, which means this is the second to last slide. Here we go. Spells with manipulation utility like detonate, push, or remove gain conditional value when attached to a hit. This was a rule made a year or so ago. We've more recently applied it in the Darkmoor update. This is why spells like Can't Bandit have a high amount of damage versus like if it didn't have conditional value. And remember, conditional value is that formula I stated before. So this one is essentially destroying damage over times and creating damage over times. That's kind of how it's valued. A push is worth 4, for example. Now, if it didn't have conditional value, this spell wouldn't be able to push 2, but it's given conditional value because it is, I guess, the definition of conditional means that if you use the spell and you don't get all of the value out of it all the time because of the state of the board, of the hanging effects on you or your opponent, then it's a conditional spell. If you use this spell and you don't have any dots on you, you're not getting as much out of it. But we don't give conditional values to spells that do it itself. So simple removals shift the spell itself, doesn't get conditional value. It's worth 4 as well, because you're casting the spell there. If you're casting the spell, I guess the condition is the requisite for you casting the spell. The spell doesn't do anything else, so that's kind of how that works. All right, then we have for hit and utility spells. Okay, this one I'm a little less proud of. There's a creation chart based on owner and borrower. I was going to have a whole slide about it when I was making this yesterday. It was too long, and it's not like I haven't run it by the other designers, so I'm not gonna say this is our rule. But essentially, what its purpose is to give a reason to go into one school over another, which is why Death is able to create 3 with this, and the Queen Calypso spell was not able to create 3. And yeah, it kind of relates to this one to an extent. But yeah, we are working on that one. That's why I didn't really show it, but this Lord of Night spell kind of shows you what it's about. Okay, and now comes the spreadsheet time, the big one. Okay, let me make sure that this is ready to show. Okay. It's grabbing the other Excel sheet, isn't it? That is not the correct one. Thank you. Okay, here we go, folks. Now this one is a lot. Fun little fact here. Well, this is the spell. This is the sheet where we have every spell in the game, every tier of spell in the game, and every targeting. And what I mean by that is spells that are selected target are they'd require 4 rows because you need to plan out how much does this do for 1 person, 2 person, 3 targets, 4 targets. Anyway, so if you count all of that up, we have subtract 12 for these columns. We have 3,600 spells. And this is just trained, by the way. This does not include treasure cards, item cards, not even magic weaving. Anyway, yay. Super fun. Okay, so Berry Surprise Path D. Yeah, so Berry Surprise Path D is there, and you can see there's no C because Path C was retired. And some of you know that one. So rather than changing it, we had to make a new path. Anyway, so let's see. We need a dark mode. See, it's in dark mode. You see this whole border? It's black. It is dark mode, but it is what it is. Sorry for your eyes. So let's look at Storm Shark. I guess let me open all these columns. This is gonna take a while. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so first you have the school, obviously, Storm. Notes unvalued. So this is where these are reasons why spells are unvalued. Infinite removal, for example, is something we don't really have a value on. Pacify, not yet. Insane Bolt, this is like the old version. This is where we put notes. Minions aren't done yet. Crit boost. So this is where I put notes on things, and it makes the spell black for spells that we haven't quite gotten to yet, basically. Then we have overvalued. So this is in this column over here. I guess I'm kind of skipping ahead, but this is the target value. This is where all of those formulas I gave you before, this is where it adds it up. And then the total value, it takes the sum of all of the effects of the spell itself, and it makes sure that they match. The red ones are ones that are overvalued, and the blue ones are ones that are undervalued. And then if it's overvalued, I give a note here. If I get rid of this, I don't know if it'll do it. Yeah, if I don't do this, it's a deeper red to show you that I haven't gone through it. But everything in here should be gone through. We made an exception for Arc 1 top paths because they were built in a way where they're overvalued by our current standards. But our options, whether being banning or nerfing, we don't really want to do either of them. We don't have a great option, so we kind of hand wave that, at least for now. But it does still show up, so if we ever need to go back through it, that's where it goes. Undervalued kind of shows you why things are so. The Healing Current and Berry Surprise you see have Burst Heal as the reason. Burst Heal was we changed it recently such that heal per pip is equal across all schools. That's why these spells were on value but are now under value. We didn't go through and buff all of them, but that is where it's at. And then the if it is banned from advanced, this gives you the reason. Maybe it's overvalued, maybe it's infinite removal and it's anti-magic wheel, like this one is because it removes blades. Minions, burst healing, the percent value into damage might be the reason it's banned, and so forth. So all that fun note-taking is why things are the way they are. And then we have the pips. So base pips, shadow pips, school pips, kind of self-explanatory. That's, very surprised again is a 4 pip spell with a school pip, even though in game it says 2+1. It's more in line with rank 4s, in terms of the library. So that's kind of why we do it this way. In here, we have the debug names of things. That's not really useful to you guys. That's our internal name for things. The level requirement, which I went over before, why things are the way they are. Where you get it from, Professor Mildred Mortis, a quest, and so forth. That sometimes is relevant. And then if it can be cross-trained, so they're pretty much all Ys, meaning yes. The ones that can't be cross-trained are usually ones from quests. And this is useful in that sheet I showed you before. We I think either we have a filter or it does filter already for cross-train ability. So the spells that aren't cross-trained won't show up in there, so that it doesn't stop us from making more spells like that. And then standard only, these are the ones that are banned. And they have a Y, and this cell has conditional formatting to let me know that it needs to have a note if it is banned. Okay, this one I don't really think I need to go through, but it's a shorthand for the spell effects. It's really relevant for that previous spreadsheet we were looking at, where it basically goes through this and deciphers what the spell does based on it. Like I said, you can kind of intuit what it does, but yeah. Let's see, what do we have here? Type. Type is something like hit is H. Utility is U. Hit and utility is HU. Hit and conditional is HC. This is important for later on. You know how I showed you the percentages of stuff. Now this is what kind of validates it. So for a hit and conditional, the base ratio, which I'll get to, needs to be in a certain range. All right, card type. This is just kind of a field that you see on the spell, like a little fist, a little open fist, a little heart, That's what that is. Target type, single enemy, single friendly. This is kind of self-explanatory. What type of target does it? Target, max copies. This is almost always 0, except for burst healing and steel pip. I'm pretty sure those are the only 2 exceptions, but that does affect the value a little bit, but again, not very common. And then no reshuffle. Same thing. Okay. Then tier. This shows the tier of spell. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 2, 3, 4, 5. Sorry, there's not one. That's how this goes. And then the accuracy of the spell. With the rare exception of some path A's, everything is uniform now in terms of their accuracy. That was a change we made. So that is good. Targets. This is only really relevant like for, let's look at open Iron Sultan. There's where it changes. This is Iron Sultan, the base spell. Target 1 target, 2 targets, 3 targets, 4 targets. And that's how that goes. All right. Target value. Remember all of the things that I showed before. Base value, how that's calculated. I did take out all the formulas, which is why you don't see them right now. It's not because I'm trying to hide them, but they broke. They broke when I tried to. This is on my personal computer, not my work computer. So, yep. Not trying to bore you all too much. Base value, conditional value, tier value, all of that summed is the target of the spell. Then the total value, again, base total rand. If a spell has random spell effects, we'll go over that. But there's basically these are the spell effects that always happen, the spell effects that sometimes happen, and the spell effects that are randomly happen. All right, so these two have to be more or less equal. And then base ratio. This is where it takes the base value and the damage, basically, and it tells you what percentage it is. And we have a certain target for that, obviously. All right. You still with me? Let's see. Now we go into the effects. This is where it gets kind of crunchy, but yeah, basically all of the spells to the right are this repeated. You have a spell effect. They all have K in front of it. I don't really know why. But yeah, so it does damage, it does how much, what type of damage, what target, and what amount. And then this is the value of that. This value is the longest formula you'll ever see, because there's so many exceptions, but we'll go over where these values come from a little bit later. But yeah, so you do damage, and then there's up to 4 effects you can do on your own. Then you have some random effects, what percent chance for them to happen, and this is kind of how the value ranges come into play. 375, 390, 405, 420, and then 435. So on the card, they'll say 375 to 435. So this is exactly how that breaks down. And yeah, I have up to 7 of those. And then here comes the conditions, where you have the condition type, could be either gambit, clear, enemy, or friendly. Those are like, those are where it's basically a condition that doesn't remove. So this applies a lot with balance, and it's like where echo comes in, and stuff like detonate and other manipulations. And then you have your effects that you can get rid of. Obviously, global and minions are not ready yet. Scaling. This is actually kind of important. Scaling means that if you have more than one, does it need to have all of them, or does it do it no matter the number? So that was a weird way to say it. Example, if you have a clear 5, it is scaling, then that means you could clear 2 for 2, 3 for 3, 4 for 4, 5 for 5, 1 for 1. If it's 5 and it's not scaling, that means they need to have 5 shields on them. Otherwise, it won't do anything. This has only really been seen in the gambits. But if you are not scaling, you get extra value, because it's harder to meet that condition. Anything with 1 we treat as scaling, like you don't get a bonus for meeting 1, which makes sense. Replace base. This is really for accounting purposes. It basically means that this 765 damage that Storm Shark B does is it replaces the initial damage. It doesn't do it as well. So yeah. And then the number is kind of self-explanatory. So like if I said 2, then that would gambit 2 hots and whatnot. And the sheet itself doesn't stop me from doing that. That's where the rules, the creation rules from earlier come into play. And then you can have 2 conditions. Again, this is really for balance. And then you just have more effects and whatnot. I guess I can show you that when you put in a heal over time like this, and I say like, hey, let's do 960 over 4, it spits it out to tell you that that's going to be split up over 2 hots with 480 each. 4 hots. And yeah, and this all the way to the right really just goes into what, up to 9, I guess. Up to 9 would be clearing 8 and creating 8. That's why it's 9. Okay. I'm sure we'll come back here in the question portion, but that's really how this works. I mean, it obviously takes time to make spell changes, and I update this, and I also update other documentation with every spell change. But yeah, anyway, so yeah, everything in here is up to date. We also have a little thing of how many spells each school has, so that's kind of cool. There's the similar thing for magic weaving. It's the same exact structure. I broke the formulas a little bit. It's the same exact structure, except there's a casting school column. But it's the same structure. We're gonna skip over the minion stuff for now because that's not quite ready. All right, effect values. Now here is where things get. I wouldn't take a screenshot of this if I were you, because a lot of these aren't used anymore. Some of them are. So we go with, like, for example, there's your multi-target values that I explained before. Here's the conditional values, like I said. So for clearing or enemy, they're always 60. For gambiting, they're 50. For friendly, they're 25. So this is like the if I have a hot on myself without removing it. We don't do that often. Where does this apply? This applies to like extending hots and stuff. That's where that kind of comes into play, but it's very rare we use any of these. Instance value, this is the same chart that I showed you before. And then you have non-scaling value, which is the extra bonus you get per hanging effect of if that condition is non-scaling, again, like the gambits. And then I don't think we really use these. Yeah, no, we definitely don't use these. And this is a mess under here that's expanded. But value tables is what y'all are probably looking for. Okay, let's go to, this is the one that everyone wants to see. So this at the top is the point value, and these are the percentages of the spell, so of the effect. And these are kind of confusing, but I should probably have edited these for y'all, but let's take these. These are shields. So a universal shield at 0 pips is 50%. Tower shield, obviously. A chromatic version is 60, and a school specific is 70. That's why your 0 pip double shields are 70s. Anyway, so then it moves on up to here, up to the 2.5 mostly. Technically, some of them stop here, some of them stop kind of in the middle here. As you can see, it's not perfect, but that's kind of where we're at. This is red because incoming heal beneficial would be like a healing shield. We've never used that, so that's why it's red. Anyway, so this basically we did the math. So from here, as this cell color means it's a manual input. From here, we basically added a stack on top of that. So you basically multiply this by itself, and you get this. And then everything else in between here is just kind of in between. So that's kind of where things are based. I think this is the traps. No, wait, where's the trap? This is the traps. That's why you get your 70% traps. That's why they exist. Oh wait, nope, that's not it. It was here. There's some drain stuff in here I probably should have removed. But it exists. Okay. This is for things to work. Okay. Yeah, here's Fusion Boost. It is 1.3. I was right about that. And some math for draw probability, which will probably apply to what's it called? Why am I blanking? Item cards, when we get to that eventually. So the reason we did double, by the way, is basically we asked ourselves, what is the most value like a trap should ever be? And we basically came up with, like I said, 2 stacked. So 2 base ones stacked. So why so a 70% trap is actually less than if you did 240s. Anyway, that's where we're at. Again, everything's open to changes. A couple other things. This is damage per pip. It's a strange chart, but this is what you're probably going to want to look at. This is something that I'm sure you guys have seen often. Well, those of you who are into this math kind of stuff. And it goes up. There's an acceleration at a certain point where as you get higher up, it goes up higher than exact. So yeah, there you go. Fun times. And then this is kind of dots. It's this kind of same thing as this, but it also shows you how you get additional value. I should probably point this out right here. You get additional value after 4 rounds. So the longer a dot is out, the more value you get for the dot. Under 3, it costs more. Basically, the reason for this big shift is saying if you're a low cost dot, say like Fire Elf, if you add more rounds to it, you're just getting more value out of that, because chances are the more rounds you add, it's just you're trying to keep it out there for conditional purposes or for shields. Whereas if you go higher, you're keeping it out there for the actual damage. And they are worth more later out because you're waiting longer to realize that damage. Okay, there's other stuff here, but I think that's gonna be where I take it back for now. All right, so now we have question time. That was a lot. I hope that was interesting for you guys. Just as I wanted to point out, one more time, everything is up for rediscussion. Everything has a reason. I would point out that when you talk to us about spell values and stuff, we often try to find the rule. Like if you say, hey, X spell is too good, X spell is too bad, or Y spell is too bad, we try to look at, okay, why would that be? If it follows all the rules, it's like maybe it should be good and or bad, or balanced. Sorry, maybe it should be balanced based on all these rules. So then why doesn't it seem balanced? We come from it as, okay, we probably need to make another rule, and what would that rule be? Because if something is broken in one place, chances are it's broken somewhere else. So yeah. Anyway, now I'm going to questions. I will be reading the chat. Let's go. Okay, hate to throw the balance question. How do prisms value out? Prisms are worth 1. I don't think we have a justification for that other than that's just how they've always been. Prisms have always been worth that, but yeah, we haven't really looked at prisms. It's kind of an odd thing. It's yeah, converting damage, it's hard to kind of quantify that value. Do the fire weaving utilities count as a chromatic dot? They do not, because of what I said before. The reason that chromatic dots weren't below rank 5 was because of shield counter ability. Therefore, that does not apply to bombs. Okay. Do the fire weaving utilities count as chromatic dots? Yes, they do, kind of. Oh, sorry, I misread your question. The myth ones don't because they're of the bombs, but the fire ones do. Yes. Okay. Would you make the weaving traps cost 2 pips and buff their potency accordingly? Would we? Or are you asking could we? By the spreadsheet. Well, that's a good point to point out. By the spreadsheet will let us do a lot of things. Then there's a bit of gut checking that goes on. If you're asking for specifics, it would be, if you buffed it up to 2, they would be basically 50% traps, or maybe 55s. One of those. It's technically, the sheet tells us 53%, so we'd pick one, but it's probably closer to 55% for 2 pips. It's possible. Maybe that's something we'll do in the future. Let's see. Are we going to get level signifiers on PvE only cards, like when we scale to fight? Yes, they should be on there already. I know there's something in the works for making that whole band and level restriction thing look better. That's still in the works. What rank do you use for X rank spells for Spellement tiers? That is a good question. X pip spells are a weird one. Let me just kind of look that up, shall we? Let's see. Yeah. The tier value on it, it looks like it uses rank 1, but it's not exactly that. Basically, and maybe there's a better way to do it. Basically, we figure out for XPip spells where should it be at tier 5, and then just kind of subtract 5 going down, because that's kind of it doesn't scale perfectly, especially when you have XPip stuff. And that's kind of how we do the rank 1s as well, because rank 1s are a really strange animal, just because like the difference in value for the tiers doesn't justify 5 damage even. Maybe it does for Storm, but nobody else, so it gets kind of goofy. It doesn't always work. Okay. What value percents are used for fusions? Borrowed or owned? Fusions, which ones? If you're talking about weaving are all conditionals. So the borrowed owned thing only applies to hit and utility. And the only hit and utility spells that we've done that have been fusions have been mono. So that'd be depending on the school. Could the spreadsheet cut to the 29x myth trap spell from last April? I don't have that in the sheet, but it was made with the sheet, and what he's referring to. Let me see if I can get this up. That's a really good example. So I'm gonna actually see if I have it. Do I still have it? Where would it be? Fun streams? April Fools. Yes. Yes. Okay. Thank you for bringing this up. Okay, let me put it up here. Okay, so this spell is something that I showed on April Fools. And it was to highlight that even if the spreadsheet tells you that something is on value, it doesn't mean you should really make the spell. So this is the 45 damage and 23 30% traps. I think by the numbers that would be on value, but it's obviously ridiculous. So anyway, that's why the creation rules and the value rules have to work together. Thank you for that reminder. Okay. Why did the previous poison get removed if it followed the script? So previous poison, are you talking about the previous version of the bottom path? That one was just player feedback. Players didn't want, they didn't like the spell. I think their reasoning was because it didn't feel thematic with the cinematic of poison. So we tried to make spell effects that fit better. Like I said, not all of design is all math and spreadsheets. There's a bit of psychology and wizardry going on. Is it possible for Tempest to get a buff? It's possible. It's possible. I don't know if it would get a buff. I haven't done the math on it, but if it got Spellement tiers, it probably would. Yeah, Judgment is an example where tiering up, it couldn't go up by damage per pip because it was already too high. So it had to go up by a flat amount of damage. We might have to do that with Tempest, I don't know. Is there a systemic thing that makes all balance weaving utilities prisms? So for balance being prisms, the reason why that is basically we wanted to give for every school it's a dual trap, right? Or dual blade. For balance, we couldn't do that because there's no balance school specific blades or traps. There are some in weaving, which I'm sure you guys have seen. That's only for non-balance wizards, which we made an exception for. But generally speaking, part of balance's identity is being neither, as I showed you here, it's being neither countered nor synergized with fully. So that's why they don't get school-specific blades and traps, but other schools also don't get balance-specific weaknesses and shields. We've cut internally, we're not like 100% sold on that decision, but overall, I mean, it is all how it's always been. So we get the pros and cons of that. The prisms are to make it so that you can basically, so if you have a balance prism trap and 2 death traps, I can use a balance spell that uses one of the death traps, and I can use a death spell that uses one of the death traps. So it's kind of goofy, but balance is kind of goofy. Have there ever been any magic weaving fusions you have made where you felt restricted in terms of the old models, like you did not want to make the spell fuse to particular spells, but previous assets are making? Yeah, that's true. So for weaving, sometimes we are locked in to what we have the art for. So if I were trying to make a life bloodbat, I use an example that I know, life bloodbat, we're locked into that spell either gambiting a shield or creating a trap, because that's what bloodbat does. So it narrows the design space a little bit, but I think so far I don't think that there's been anything where we haven't come up with something that would be useful in some scenario. Some of y'all might not agree, so feel free to let me know. But yeah. Got formulas for dilution. Dilution's a strange one. That one, I actually have a comment on that cell because it's so, in the here, I can kind of show you. I can kind of show you. As you see, balance has a lot of value problems. I don't know why it's so. Okay, it doesn't let me read it, but this cell is something that we manually put for dilution. Yeah. there was a reason for it. I would have to go back to the other version, my work laptop, to see what that reason is. So that's very rare. But yeah, swaps are so as I said, pushes and steals are the same value as destroy and create. Swaps are half of that, I think. Actually, no, they're halfway between. So like destroy a dot is 2, push a dot is 4, swap a dot is 3. So it's in between destroy and then destroy and create. So that's where swaps are. Could the death clear 2 blades for 2 death blades get a buff? Is that a spell that exists that you're asking about? I don't think there is one, but that's a spell that could exist. Clear 2 death blades for 2 death blades. Right now they have that at. Let me actually look at the spell library sheet. So clear blades for blades. They have one at rank 4. I think that's Ship of Fools, and they have one at rank 8, that being Skeleton Dragon. So could they have one at rank 2? Maybe. That is a hole that we could fill. Yeah. Okay. Now, what else? Okay. I can see why all this leads to discussions on selected target utility spells like advanced version of Bladestorm. Yes, that does happen. We don't have a rule for that yet, but math-wise, that's where it would be heading. We're actually not sure. We're not sure if we might do it the Beast Moon way, where it's just half value, but I don't know. We'll find out. Anyway, I think that's where we're at. So I'm going to end the video here. So if you're watching on YouTube, hope you enjoyed. Leave a comment if you have another question, and I'll try to get to them all. And if you're at Twitch, stick around. But yeah, goodbye.